The alien queen wandered through the endless corridors of her palace, her mind heavy with sorrow. Once this palace had been full of life and laughter. Bright lights shimmered across the walls, and the sound of her child's laughter had echoed through the halls like music. But now the halls were empty. Silence had taken its place, and every step she took felt heavier than the last. The weight of her failure pressed down on her, and she could hardly breathe. She had been the ruler of her world, strong and wise, but losing her child had shaken her to the core. Nothing she had done in her long life could have prepared her for this pain. Outside the palace windows, the sky was a strange color, a mixture of pale blues and soft purples that reflected the sadness she felt inside. Her people moved quietly through the streets, their faces downcast. Even the brightest lights of her city seemed dim, as if they too had given up hope. She remembered the last time she had seen her child, playing near the glowing river at the edge of the city. The child had chased floating orbs of light, laughing and calling out her name. That memory, which once filled her with joy, now cut through her heart like a sharp blade. She wished she had held the child closer, had protected them more carefully. The thought of her absence from those last moments haunted her endlessly. Thoai. Queen's advisors gathered around her daily, their voices polite but worried. They tried to offer advice and suggestions, yet nothing they said could ease her pain. Some of them urged her to accept the loss, to move on for the sake of the people. Others whispered that continuing the search was foolish, that it only brought more despair. But the queen could not listen to them. She knew that a parent's bond with their child was not something that could be measured or dismissed. It was sacred, unbroken even in the face of impossible odds. She could not, and would not, give up. Every day, she walked through her child's favorite rooms, touching the furniture and toys left behind. She lingered over drawings, little handprints, and tiny clothing items. Each item told a story of a life that had been full of curiosity and laughter. The queen tried to imagine the child smiling again, and in those moments hope flickered like a fragile flame. She reminded herself that despair could not win, that her love for her child was stronger than any sadness, stronger than the emptiness around her. Despite her grief, the queen was careful to maintain appearances in public. When she met her people, in the grand halls or on the palace balcony, she smiled, though it never reached her eyes. She answered their questions politely and encouraged them to keep moving forward, even as her own heart felt broken. Inside, she felt as though she were walking through a shadowed world, one that had lost color and warmth. Nights were the hardest when the city slept, and she was alone with her memories. The silence seemed endless, broken only by the faint hum of energy from the palace itself. One evening, she stood by the window and looked down at the glowing river where her child had been last seen. The light from the river reflected in her eyes, and she felt a pang of longing so deep that it made her knees weak. She could almost hear her child's laughter, almost see the little figure running along the banks. She closed her eyes, letting the memory wash over her, and for a moment, the world outside faded completely. She imagined the child reaching up to her, calling her name with joy, and she felt both comforted and heartbroken at the same time. The queen's nights were filled with restless walking and silent prayers. She prayed not for herself, but for her child's safety. She whispered into the empty halls, asking the universe, the stars, or any being that might listen to guide her child back to her. She remembered all the dangers that existed beyond the palace walls, the wild creatures, the harsh lands, the storms that could strike without warning, and her fear grew with each passing day. Yet she refused to give in to despair entirely. Deep down, she clung to a belief that love was stronger than the odds, that somehow, against everything, her child could still be found. Her people noticed her sorrow, and many felt powerless to help. Some brought gifts, hoping to lift her spirits. but she could not smile genuinely. Others offered stories of hope, tales of children who had returned after long disappearances, but she could not bring herself to believe them fully. The queen was trapped between hope and hopelessness, a place where every passing moment seemed heavier than the one before. Yet even in this shadowed state, she found tiny sparks of determination. She would not leave her child behind. She would search until her last breath if necessary. Even in her moments of despair, the queen reflected on the love she had always felt for her child. She remembered teaching them to walk, to speak, to understand the beauty of their world. She remembered quiet evenings spent reading and telling stories, and mornings filled with laughter over little adventures. These memories became her anchor, reminding her of the bond that could never be broken. Though the world seemed dark, the love she carried was a beacon, guiding her through each day. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but the queen did not stop. She organized search parties, consulted the wisest beings across the universe, and examined every clue that came her way. She refused to let despair rule her completely. At times, she felt a flicker of hope, a sense that something miraculous could happen. That small flicker, though fragile, was enough to keep her moving. She walked the halls again, whispering her child's name, holding on to the thought that one day she would hear it answered back. Through all this, the queen remained a symbol of strength to her people, even if they did not fully understand the depths of her grief. They saw her determination and her refusal to surrender, and it inspired them to believe in hope, even when circumstances seemed impossible. Though her heart ached, she remained a queen who refused to give up entirely, a mother who would search for her child until the stars themselves gave way. Outside the palace walls, the queen's world seemed to echo her sorrow. The city, once full of life and energy, had lost its sparkle. Streets that were once bustling with merchants, artists, and children now seemed quiet and empty. People moved, slowly, heads bowed, their laughter a distant memory. Even the marketplaces, where vibrant colors of fruits, fabrics, and flowers had once dazzled visitors, now looked dull, almost lifeless. The queen's pain had spread beyond the palace, touching every corner of the city. Her people felt the shadow of her grief, and they could not help but mirror it. Her advisors tried to maintain order, but even they struggled. Some whispered in fear that the queen's despair would paralyze the entire society. Others suggested sending search parties far beyond the city, into the dangerous lands that surrounded their world. The queen had already done this countless times, yet nothing had brought news of her child. Each failure weighed heavily on her heart, but she refused to give in to despair completely. She knew that if she stopped searching, hope would vanish. Entirely, not just for her, but for everyone who still believed in a miracle. The queen often walked among her people, observing their lives quietly. She noticed how children played less, how families whispered more, and how even the smallest joys seemed muted. Parents avoided speaking of her child, fearing it would worsen her pain, but their silence only reminded everyone of the loss that hung over the city. The queen understood their fear and sadness, and she wanted to protect them from the same despair that threatened to consume her. Still, she could not hide her own sorrow entirely. Every glance, every hesitation, every small sigh betrayed the heartbreak she carried within. At times, strange rumors circulated across the land. Some spoke of unusual lights in the sky, flickering and moving like fireflies. Others claimed to have seen mysterious ships or travelers passing through distant lands. Yet no one could confirm these stories, and none brought the queen closer to finding her child. Each rumor sparked a tiny hope in her chest, only to be crushed by disappointment when nothing came of it. Still, she held on to these fragments of possibility, unwilling to let go completely. Every hope, no matter how small, was worth chasing. The queen's nights were the hardest. Alone in her chambers, she would stare out of her palace windows, looking at the glowing river where her child had last played. The water shimmered under the moonlight, reflecting her memories back at her. She remembered the child's small hands, splashing in the river, the joyful giggles, and the way their eyes lit up at even the simplest wonders. These memories filled her with both comfort and pain. Comfort, because they reminded her of the love that still existed. Pain, because they were reminders of what had been lost. She could almost reach out and touch her child, almost hear them call her name. The queen tried to distract herself during the day, but every object, every corner of the palace reminded her of the child. Tiny drawings hung on the walls, toys lay abandoned in rooms, and clothing was folded neatly but never worn. She would walk slowly past these things, touching them gently, feeling the presence of her child through them. It was a bittersweet comfort, one that gave her strength and reminded her why she could not surrender. She had loved this child since the moment they were born, and that love had not faded. It was a fire that refused to die, even in the coldest shadows of despair. Her people watched her closely. They saw the sorrow in her eyes, but they also noticed the determination in her movements. The queen never stopped searching, never stopped asking questions, and never ceased to plan new ways to find her child. Her courage inspired some to keep hoping, even when their own hearts felt heavy. Children, seeing the queen's devotion, learned that love was more powerful than fear. Adults who had begun to lose faith in the possibility of miracles felt their spirits lifted slightly by her perseverance. Even in grief, the queen was a symbol of strength. The queen met daily with her advisors and generals, discussing every possibility, every clue, every rumor. Some suggested sending messengers to distant planets. Others proposed creating new devices to detect her child's presence. She listened patiently to all ideas, weighing their merits carefully. Sometimes she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, knowing that every decision could affect not only her child, but her entire society. Yet, she never allowed fear or despair to stop her from exploring every path. Each day was another chance to find the child, and she refused to waste it. Despite the sadness that lingered in the air, moments of unexpected joy occasionally appeared. A child would run past her in the marketplace, laughing freely, and the queen would smile softly, remembering the laughter of her own child. A flower would bloom in a quiet garden, its bright colors shining like a small beacon, and she would feel a flicker of hope. These small moments reminded her that life continued, and that even in the darkest times, light could return. They were tiny reminders that she could not give up, no matter how long the search took. As weeks passed, the queen became more determined. She spent long hours studying maps, listening to travelers' stories, and searching for any clue, no matter how small. She refused to allow despair to paralyze her completely. Her love for her child was a force that could not be diminished. She reminded herself that miracles sometimes happened in the most unlikely ways, that even a single act of bravery or kindness could change the course of events. Every day she kept hope alive, even when it seemed fragile. The queen also began to think about the future. She realized that finding her child was not only about ending her own sorrow, but about restoring hope to her people. Their lives had been shadowed by loss, and she knew that their joy would return only when her child was safe. She imagined the city alive again, with laughter echoing through the streets and colors shining brightly once more. She imagined children playing freely, families celebrating together, and the glow of the river reflecting happiness instead of sadness. These visions gave her strength to continue, even in moments when her heart felt heavy with despair. Through it all, the queen never stopped loving her child. She remembered the small hands, the bright eyes, and the sound of their laughter. She carried these memories with her always, letting them guide her actions and decisions. Even when everything seemed lost, she held on to the belief that one day she would hear her child's voice again. That belief, fragile yet unbreakable, became the foundation of her courage. She refused to let go because love was stronger than fear, stronger than despair, and stronger than the passing of time. And so, each day, the queen continued her search, walking through her city, speaking with her people, and exploring every possible way to find her missing child. Her heart ached, yet it remained steadfast. Though the city seemed quiet, though the streets seemed empty, she knew that hope could still be found. Somewhere, out there, her child waited, and she would not stop until they were safely back in her arms. One morning, the queen was in her private chambers, reviewing reports from her scouts and advisors, when a commotion arose outside the palace gates. Guards were rushing back and forth, their voices filled with a mixture of confusion and excitement. The queen's heart skipped a beat. After months of fruitless searching, after endless days of despair, could this be another false hope? She stepped carefully toward the balcony to see what was happening. Below, in the palace courtyard, stood a human, a being unlike any she had ever seen. Humans were rare in her world, and their appearance always drew attention. This one was ordinary. In size, neither too tall nor too small, with simple clothing and a calm presence. What set him apart was the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence in his movements, and the determination in his eyes. He did not look lost or afraid. Instead, he walked steadily toward the queen's guards, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. The guards hesitated, unsure what to do. They had been trained to handle threats of all kinds, aliens from distant planets, rogue machines, and wild creatures. But this human seemed different. Finally, one of the senior guards stepped forward and asked the human why he had come. The human spoke clearly, explaining that he had found the queen's missing child. At first, the words seemed impossible. The queen's mind refused to accept them. After months of searching, after years of despair, could it really be true that someone had found her child and returned safely? The queen descended from her chambers quickly, her heart pounding. Her advisors followed, trying to maintain order while the people in the courtyard watched with wide eyes. She demanded to see the child immediately. The human nodded calmly and motioned for the queen to follow him outside the gates. The journey they began was cautious but steady. The human explained that he had traveled through dangerous lands to bring the child back. He had faced wild storms, treacherous terrain, and creatures that no alien could face alone. Yet, he had persevered, driven only by the desire to reunite the queen with her child. The queen listened carefully, skepticism and hope fighting for dominance in her heart. She had encountered many strangers who claimed knowledge of her child's whereabouts, only for their stories to prove false. How could she trust this human? His appearance was ordinary, almost fragile, compared to the aliens of her world. But there was something in his voice, steady and honest, that made her pause. There was no fear, no hesitation, only determination and sincerity. Perhaps, she thought, this human was different. Perhaps he could succeed where others had failed. As they traveled through the outer lands of her city, the queen observed the human's interactions with the people. He was kind and respectful, listening carefully to questions, answering calmly, and helping where he could. He did not seek praise or attention, yet his presence brought a quiet sense of comfort to those around him. The queen began to feel a small flicker of hope. Could this human, so simple yet so determined, really have the power to bring her child back? After what felt like hours, they reached a hidden valley on the outskirts of the city. The place was beautiful but unfamiliar, filled with glowing plants and shimmering streams. And there, playing near a small pool of water, was her child. The moment the queen saw them, her breath caught. The child looked safe, unhurt, though their eyes reflected fear and confusion. They were hesitant at first, uncertain of the stranger who had brought them here. But as soon as the queen stepped forward, their face lit up with recognition and relief. The child ran toward her, and the queen dropped to her knees, gathering them into her arms. The warmth of their body, the sound of their small voice calling her name, it was everything she had longed for. Tears streamed down her face as she held the child close, unable to speak. Words were unnecessary. The human stood quietly nearby, watching the reunion with a calm expression, knowing his role had been to bring them together and nothing more. The queen finally looked at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. She wanted to thank him, to express all the emotions that had built up over months of despair. But words seemed too small, too weak to convey the depth of her feelings. She simply nodded, letting him know that his actions had changed everything. The child, sensing the queen's emotion, clung to her even tighter, and in that embrace, the queen felt a completeness she had thought was lost forever. Her advisors and the people who had accompanied her into the valley watched in awe. They had expected a long, drawn-out search or a painful discovery, but instead, they witnessed a miracle. A human, a stranger from another world, had achieved what none of them could. The queen's faith in hope, fragile but unbroken, had been rewarded. Even in the darkest moments, she realized, courage and kindness could appear in the most unexpected forms. The human spoke softly to the queen, explaining the journey he had undertaken. He described the challenges he had faced, storms that raged without warning, dangerous creatures that stalked every path, and landscapes that tested his endurance and determination. Yet, he never complained. He never doubted that he could succeed. His focus had been clear from the beginning. Find the child and return them safely to their mother. The queen listened, amazed at the perseverance and bravery of this ordinary being. As the sun began to set, casting warm, golden light across the valley, the queen held her child close and looked at the human with gratitude that went beyond words. She realized that hope, even in its smallest and most fragile form, could lead to miracles. She understood that sometimes help could come from unexpected places, and that even those who seemed ordinary could accomplish extraordinary things. This realization filled her with a renewed sense of strength and determination. For the first time in months, the queen felt a lightness in her heart. Her child was safe, and her people could once again believe in the possibility of miracles. The bond between parent and child, which had been tested by fear and loss, was stronger than ever, and the human, standing quietly nearby, had become a symbol of courage, perseverance, and unexpected heroism. The queen knew she would never forget this day, this moment, and the extraordinary act that had restored hope to her world. The journey back to the palace was calm and filled with soft conversation. The child held tightly to the queen's hand, and the human walked at a respectful distance, allowing the mother and child to reconnect. Along the way, the queen reflected on the lessons she had learned, that despair could be overcome, that kindness and courage were powerful forces, and that hope could arrive when least expected. She felt ready to face her responsibilities once more, knowing that the strength of love could overcome even the greatest of fears. When they finally arrived at the palace gates, the city's people gathered to witness the reunion. There were cheers, cries of joy, and expressions of relief. The queen carried her child through the streets, showing everyone that hope had returned. And though she could not find words to fully express her gratitude, her eyes and actions spoke volumes. The human, humble and quiet, stepped aside, content in knowing he had fulfilled a mission far greater than himself. He had given a mother back her child, and in doing so, he had changed a world. The queen's heart was pounding as she followed the human to the hidden valley. Every step felt like an eternity, and her mind raced with hope and fear. Could it really be true? Could her child actually be alive after all this time? Her memories of their laughter, their small hand slipping into hers, the joy in their eyes, these had been her constant companions in the months of despair. She held on to them tightly, afraid that if she let go, she might lose the courage to keep searching. When the valley finally came into view, she froze. There, near a pool of crystal-clear water, was her child. Their small figure looked safe, though. Their eyes were wide with uncertainty. The child had seen the queen's approach and took a hesitant step forward. Then, as recognition dawned, their face lit up with joy and relief. The queen's breath caught in her throat, and tears streamed down her face. After months of endless worry, of wandering through empty halls and silent streets, the moment she had dreamed of had arrived. The child ran toward her, and she dropped to her knees, arms wide open. They collided in a tight embrace, and the queen could feel their warmth, hear their heartbeat, and smell the familiar scent that she had longed for. Every fear, every sleepless night, every tear she had shed seemed to vanish in that single moment. She held her child as if she could never let go, and the child clung to her with equal intensity, pressing their face into her shoulder. The queen whispered their name again and again, afraid that words might not be enough to capture the flood of relief and love she felt. The human stood quietly a few steps away, watching the reunion unfold. He said nothing, knowing that his presence was secondary to the bond between mother and child. He had done what he came to do, and now it was time for them to reconnect. He observed the child's cautious glance toward him, then the smile that slowly returned as they realized he had been the one to bring them home. The human's expression remained calm, but inside he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had journeyed through dangers unimaginable to many, faced storms, wild creatures, and harsh landscapes, yet all of it had led to this perfect moment. The queen finally looked up at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. Words were difficult to find. How could she thank someone for bringing back the most precious part of her life? Every emotion she had felt over months of despair, the fear, the hopelessness, the endless longing converged into a deep and profound gratitude. She could not articulate it fully, but her embrace of her child, the squeeze of her hands, and the tears on her cheeks spoke louder than words ever could. For a long while, the queen and her child remained in the valley, simply holding each other. She asked gently about the journey, how they had survived, and whether they had been frightened. The child, still clinging to her, spoke softly of the loneliness, the fear, and the hope that someone would come for them. Their words were hesitant, but full of honesty and relief. The queen listened carefully, letting them share every detail. She wanted to understand everything, to know that her child was safe in both body and spirit. As the conversation continued, the queen realized something important. The child had changed in ways that were subtle but profound. They were braver, more thoughtful, and more aware of the world around them. The experience, though frightening, had strengthened their spirit. She felt proud and relieved at the same time. The human had not only brought her child back, but he had also helped them grow in courage and resilience. She looked at him with admiration and deep respect. Without his help, this reunion might never have happened. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting golden light over the valley. The water reflected the warm colors, and the plants around seemed to glow with gentle luminescence. The child explored the surroundings carefully, their fear replaced gradually by curiosity. The queen smiled, watching them move with cautious joy. She realized how fragile hope had been, yet how powerful it could be when nurtured by care, determination, and kindness. This moment, she knew, would remain in her memory forever. Her advisors and attendants arrived shortly afterward, guided by the human. They had witnessed the reunion from a distance and approached cautiously, not wanting to disturb the tender moment. When they saw the queen holding her child, their faces softened, and many quietly wept. They had shared in the despair for months, and now they shared in the joy. The queen looked around at them, realizing that this moment was not just about her and her child, but also about the people of her world. Hope had returned to them all. The human remained quiet, observing the happiness he had helped create. He had faced dangers that were unimaginable to most, but he did not boast of his courage or endurance. His satisfaction came from the knowledge that he had made a difference, that he had returned a child to their mother and restored a queen's faith in hope. In the queen's eyes, he was more than a stranger. He was a hero who had bridged the gap between worlds, proving that bravery and kindness could exist even in the most ordinary of beings. As night fell, the queen and her child returned slowly to the palace, hand in hand. The people in the city had gathered to witness their return, and their joy was palpable. Laughter, once a distant memory, returned to the streets. Children ran and played freely, parents embraced each other, and the glow of the city seemed brighter than it had in months. The queen felt her heart lift with each step. Her child's safety had renewed not only her own spirit, but also the spirit of her entire world. Once inside the palace, the queen ensured that her child was comfortable and safe. They explored familiar rooms together, revisiting favorite spaces, and sharing stories of what had happened during the long absence. The queen listened intently, asking questions and offering comfort, allowing her child to express every thought and feeling. In return, the child listened to her, eager to hear her stories and guidance. The bond between them, once tested by fear and distance, now seemed unbreakable. The human finally took his leave, quietly stepping away after ensuring that everything was in order. The queen thanked him again, her words heartfelt and sincere, though still insufficient to express her full gratitude. She knew that the human's actions had changed the course of her life and the lives of everyone on her planet. He had brought hope back to a world that had nearly given up, and for that, she would always remember him. In the days that followed, the palace was filled with laughter and joy. The queen's child thrived under her care, and the people of the city felt renewed energy and optimism. Stories of the human's courage spread quickly, inspiring others to believe in hope and kindness. The queen realized that sometimes extraordinary change could come from unexpected places, and that even in the darkest moments, light could emerge. She reflected often on the events that had led to this reunion. She remembered the despair, the months of searching, and the countless sleepless nights. She thought of the human who had faced unimaginable challenges to restore what was lost. She understood that love, courage, and perseverance were forces more powerful than fear or despair. This understanding gave her a new strength, one that she knew would guide her in the years to come. With her child safely back in her arms, the queen felt a deep sense of relief she had never thought possible. The months of despair, the sleepless nights, and the endless worry had finally come to an end. Yet she knew that this reunion was only the beginning. Her world had changed in ways that could not be ignored, and she realized that she needed to act not only as a mother, but also as a leader who could guide her people into a brighter future. The lessons she had learned during the long months of searching were clear. Hope could not be taken for granted, courage could come from unexpected places, and love had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. The queen spent her days with her child, exploring the palace together, sharing stories, and rebuilding the trust that had been tested by separation. Each smile, each laugh, each tiny hand held tightly in hers reminded her that life could still be beautiful, even after hardship. She encouraged her child to talk about their experiences, listening patiently and offering comfort. She wanted to ensure that her child felt safe, loved, and understood, and that the bond between them, once threatened by distance, was now stronger than ever. Outside the palace, her people began to notice the change. Where there had once been gloom and silence, laughter and conversation returned. Children played freely in the streets, parents spoke with warmth and hope, and the glow of the city seemed brighter than it had in years. The queen made appearances throughout the city, holding her child close and demonstrating to her people that hope had been restored. She spoke to them about courage, perseverance, and the importance of never giving up, even when the odds seemed impossible. Her words, coupled with the visible proof of her child's return, inspired everyone to believe in the power of love and determination. The story of the human who had brought the child back spread quickly. People spoke of his bravery, his determination, and his selfless kindness. Though he had returned to his own world, his actions became legendary on the Queen's planet. He had shown that even an ordinary being could accomplish extraordinary things when guided by love and purpose. The Queen often thought about him, feeling gratitude that went beyond words. His courage had not only restored her child to her, but had rekindled hope for an entire civilization. The Queen also used this experience to strengthen her alliances with neighboring worlds. She realized that cooperation and trust between different beings could lead to extraordinary results. By opening channels of communication and forming friendships, she ensured that her people would be safer, stronger, and more resilient in the future. Her world, once shadowed by despair, began to thrive. Trade, culture, and knowledge flourished, and the glow of life returned to cities and landscapes alike. Her child, having experienced both fear and safety, became a symbol of resilience for the people. Children across the city were inspired by the courage and bravery of someone their own age. Parents used the story as a lesson in hope and determination, teaching that even in the darkest moments, there was always a possibility for light. The Queen encouraged her child to share their experiences, guiding them to become a source of inspiration rather than fear. Together, they helped rebuild the spirit of their people, reminding everyone that love and perseverance could overcome despair. Scott. Queen herself found a renewed strength she had not felt before. She had faced the possibility of losing her child forever, and had endured months of relentless worry and uncertainty. Yet she had never given up, and that perseverance had been rewarded. She knew that challenges would continue to arise, but she now understood that hope, love, and courage were more powerful than any obstacle. She felt ready to face the future with confidence, knowing that she could protect her child, her people, and her world. Every evening the Queen would take her child to the glowing river where memories of the past mingled with the promise of the future. They would sit together on the banks, watching the light dance across the water and talk about the day, their experiences, and the adventures that awaited them. The child laughed freely, their joy contagious, and the Queen felt a happiness so deep that it filled every corner of her being. In those quiet moments, she reflected on the journey that had brought them together, and on the extraordinary acts of courage that had made this happiness possible. The Queen also ensured that her palace reflected the change that had come to her world. The halls, once shadowed with sorrow, were now filled with light, color, and warmth. She invited artists, storytellers, and musicians to fill the space with beauty and joy. The palace became a place where hope and creativity flourished, a reflection of the renewed spirit of the Queen, her child, and her people. Visitors from near and far came to witness this transformation, inspired by the story of a mother's love, a child's courage, and the human who had made it all possible. Over time, the bond between the Queen and her child grew even stronger. They shared daily routines, adventures, and quiet moments of reflection. The Queen taught her child about leadership, compassion, and the importance of never giving up. She encouraged curiosity and exploration, knowing that the experiences of the past had made her child stronger and wiser. Together, they planned for a future filled with hope, ensuring that no one in their world would ever have to endure the same despair they had faced. The Queen also took steps to ensure that the story of the human and the child would never be forgotten. She commissioned paintings, sculptures, and stories that captured the courage, determination, and kindness that had saved her family and restored hope to her people. These works became treasured artifacts, inspiring future generations to believe in the power of love, hope, and bravery. The Queen knew that the memory of this extraordinary journey would guide her world for years to come. As the seasons changed and the years passed, the Queen and her child thrived. The city was filled with life, laughter, and light, a stark contrast to the gloom that had once consumed it. The people learned that even in the darkest times hope could return, and that courage and kindness could come from the most unexpected places. The Queen often reflected on the human's actions, realizing that his bravery had not only saved her child, but had also reminded her people of the strength that lay within each of them. In the end, the Queen understood that her journey through despair and hope had transformed her. She had learned that love was the most powerful force in the universe, capable of overcoming fear, distance, and even the passage of time. She had seen firsthand that ordinary beings could accomplish extraordinary acts, and that hope, when nurtured, could create miracles. Her child, once lost and now found, was a living reminder of this truth, and together they shaped a future filled with joy, resilience, and trust. The Queen's story became a legend, a tale of love, courage, and the extraordinary power of hope. Her world flourished, guided by the lessons she had learned and the bonds she had strengthened. And though she never forgot the months of despair that had tested her spirit, she carried them as a reminder that even in the darkest times, light could return and miracles could happen when love, courage, and determination were held close.